The morning sun had just begun to warm the tarmac at Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, casting long shadows across the glass and steel terminal like the stretch of possibilities on a clean page. There was no fanfare, no loud laughter, just the rhythmic hum of rolling luggage, scattered voices, and the occasional boarding call echoing through the vast terminal halls. To most, it was a routine day, a gateway to business trips, long-awaited reunions, and getaways. But for the Bennett family, this flight meant something more. Marcus Bennett adjusted the strap of his son's small backpack as they passed through the TSA checkpoint, his movements precise and gentle. He was composed and tall, a man of few words, his shoulders broad beneath a charcoal gray coat, and his shoes shined to a quiet mirror. Nothing flashy about him, but the way he walked, with calm intention and subtle grace, suggested a life built on discipline. Beside him, Danielle Bennett held their son Noah's hand. Her touch was warm and light, guiding without pushing. She was the kind of woman whose strength didn't need to be loud, whose words could soften tension in a room or plant confidence in a child's heart. She wore a navy blue trench coat, and her hair was pulled into a low, natural bun. Her eyes, though tired, radiated steady warmth. Noah, 6 years old, skipped lightly between his parents, one foot always just half a beat ahead of the other. He wore a small red hoodie, slightly oversized, with a smiling cartoon plane embroidered on the back, a gift from Danielle last Christmas. In his other hand, he clutched a worn stuffed bear named Leo, its ears now a little crooked from too many laundry cycles and too many nights of comfort. "Papa, are the seats rigged?" Noah asked, looking up with uncontainable curiosity. Marcus gave a small smile. "Big enough for you to stretch your legs and nap like a king." Noah giggled. "Can I get apple juice too?" "If they have it, it's yours," Danielle said, squeezing his fingers softly. Today was his first flight in first class. For Noah, it was like entering another world. And for Marcus and Danielle, it was a quiet victory. Not because they wanted to show off, but because this trip, this gesture symbolized something deeper: dignity, normalcy, the kind of experience that should be unremarkable, but too often came with tension when your skin was a little darker than those seated around you. They had saved up, made careful plans, even rehearsed travel etiquette with Noah. This wasn't a last-minute splurge. It was a decision born out of care, pride, and the quiet determination of parents wanting their son to grow up knowing he belonged in every space he entered. Gate 42C was already boarding when they arrived. "First class, rows 1 through 3, the agent called through the intercom, smiling robotically. Her voice lacked the warmth of her smile. Her eyes briefly landed on Marcus and Danielle with a flicker of something unreadable before shifting to the next passenger. Marcus didn't comment. He was used to glances that lingered a second too long. The Bennetts boarded in silence. Noah led the way, tugging gently at Marcus's hand. Inside the aircraft, the air was cool and crisp. Soft jazz played faintly in the background, barely audible above the rustling of coats and the metallic clinking of luggage handles being hoisted into overhead compartments. The smell of citrusy disinfectant still lingered, evidence of a freshly cleaned cabin. Seats 2A and 2B awaited them. Danielle helped Noah into the window seat, placing Leo beside him, then began to unzip his small travel pouch for his coloring book and a few quiet toys. Marcus stowed their carry-ons with practiced care, ensuring his son's backpack was under the seat in front, straps tucked in neatly. Across the aisle, a woman in her late 40s with platinum blonde hair and a sharply tailored uniform watched them with thinly veiled scrutiny. Her name tag read, Lexi Morgan, senior flight attendant. To most passengers, Lexi appeared confident, efficient, exactly the kind of presence you wanted aboard a commercial flight. But beneath her impeccable posture and professional smile was something colder. Her eyes, keen and controlled, moved like a scanner, measuring, sorting, judging. She noticed Marcus's careful movements, the slight way he adjusted the angle of the bag, how Danielle placed Noah's plush toy precisely in the seat corner. None of it was wrong, yet something about the family triggered an invisible calculation behind Lexi's gaze. Perhaps it was unconscious, perhaps not. Lexi had worked this route for years. She believed she could spot trouble early, but what she honed was instinct, a mix of personal experience, bias she would never admit, and gut feelings she thought were professionalism. And something in that moment made her watch the Bennetts longer than anyone else. She said nothing, not yet. The other passengers trickled in, businessmen in navy suits, a couple on their honeymoon, a woman juggling a phone call and a tote bag. The hum of conversation and shuffling bags filled the cabin. Yet Lexi's eyes often drifted back to seat 2A. Marcus caught the glance once, didn't hold it, didn't react. Danielle noticed too. Her shoulders tightened slightly. She reached over, adjusted Noah's hoodie, and kissed the top of his head. "You okay, baby?" Noah nodded, tracing clouds with his finger against the window. The aircraft door sealed with a thud. The flight deck announced final checks. Flight 331 to Boston was about to depart. Lexi did her walkthrough of the cabin, neatly, professionally. Yet when she passed row 2, her pace slowed ever so slightly. She glanced again at Marcus's feet, then at the bag tucked under the seat. Her brow furrowed. Then, without a word, she moved on. Outside, the tarmac shimmered under the morning sun. Inside, the pressure in the cabin had yet to pressurize, but already something weightier was beginning to settle. Not in the engines, in the air between people. And for the Bennetts, a flight that was supposed to be a quiet celebration of family and progress was quietly shifting course before it even left the ground. The plane began its slow taxi across the tarmac. Noah leaned forward, nose pressed to the window as the world outside drifted by in long streaks of steel and sunlight. "We're moving," he whispered excitedly, unaware of the undercurrents pulsing just beneath the surface. Danielle smiled and tucked a napkin into his collar. "Not flying yet, sweetie, but soon." Marcus glanced across the aisle. Lexi Morgan stood near the galley, conferring quietly with the other flight attendants. Her voice was low, unreadable, but her expression hadn't softened. Her arms were crossed, an almost imperceptible tightness in her jaw. He didn't say anything. Not yet. From the outside, everything seemed normal. The crew moved with fluid, well-rehearsed efficiency. The intercom pinged. "Flight attendants, prepare for takeoff." Seatbelts clicked. Bags were adjusted. The hum of engines grew deeper. But inside Marcus, something had shifted. He had grown used to being watched, measured, second-guessed. But something about this was different. Not just passive suspicion. It was active, focused, like Lexi was waiting for something. It wasn't paranoia. It was pattern recognition. The plane lifted. Noah's eyes went wide as the ground fell away. Danielle reached for his hand, and he squeezed hers tightly with joy. Look how small the cars are, he gasped. Danielle smiled, her eyes shimmering faintly in the sunlight filtering through the oval window. Magic, huh? But a shadow passed between them as Lexi began her service pass. It was the way she approached their row, deliberate, just a touch too stiff. She handed Marcus a menu without looking him in the eye. She offered a juice to Noah, her voice polite but clipped. Danielle tried to make eye contact to soften the moment. Thank you, she said warmly. Lexi nodded curtly and moved on. Minutes passed. The cabin settled. Laughter murmured from the seats behind. A pair of business partners clinked glasses. A baby somewhere mid-cabin let out a single sleepy cry, then fell quiet again. Danielle leaned into Marcus. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Is it just me, or? He didn't answer at first. His eyes remained fixed on the back of the silly curtain. It's not just you. Danielle's lips tightened. She reached for her water, hands steady but cool to the touch. They'd been here before. Not this plane, not this moment, but this feeling. That quiet, tightening sense that they were no longer simply passengers, that they were being observed, interpreted, and, if not outright challenged, then quietly suspected. It was the same feeling that sometimes came into department stores when a sales associate followed them a little too closely. The same feeling in restaurants when a server triple-checked their card or looked twice at the tip line before returning. The same feeling that Marcus had learned to mask with quiet dignity and that Danielle had learned to meet with unshakable grace for Noah's sake. But even grace has limits. Lexi returned 20 minutes later. This time she didn't bring drinks. She brought questions. I need to ask you something, she said to Marcus, her voice soft but serious, the kind of soft that made it sound more official, more calculated. Marcus turned slowly, brows lifted in calm caution. Yes? During boarding, did you happen to pick up anything from the aisle? A wallet, maybe? She asked, her eyes narrowing ever so slightly. Danielle looked up sharply. No, Marcus said, his voice steady. Lexi nodded, but it was the kind of nod that didn't accept the answer. It simply paused to consider her next move. I asked because a passenger near the front reported a missing wallet, and someone mentioned they saw you placing a bag under the seat, she added, her tone unchanged. Danielle blinked. Wait, are you saying he took it? Lexi held up a hand, feigning diplomacy. I'm not accusing anyone. I'm simply following protocol. But you came straight to us, Marcus said. His tone hadn't risen, but there was now a steel edge beneath it. You didn't ask anyone else. There was a pause. Lexi offered a brittle smile. I just need to eliminate possibilities. I saw your movement, and my movement was putting my son's backpack under the seat, Marcus replied, his voice cool, as passengers are instructed to do. Noah looked between his parents, the tension rising like pressure in his tiny chest. He didn't fully understand, but he felt the shift in air, in tone, in them. I'm going to need to take a look, Lexi said, nodding toward the bag under the seat. Danielle stiffened. That bag belongs to a child. Lexi didn't flinch. It won't take a moment. Marcus exhaled slowly. He reached down, pulled the backpack forward, and gently placed it on his lap. I'm opening this, he said to Lexi, so that my son doesn't think strangers can just reach into his things. Lexi gave no response. With deliberate calm, Marcus unzipped the bag. Out came a coloring book, a box of crayons, a plastic zippered pouch of snacks, and a small toy plane. No wallet, no mystery, no apology from Lexi. Danielle stared at her. Satisfied? Lexi hesitated, then nodded once. Thank you for your cooperation, she said. Her voice betrayed nothing. No acknowledgement of error, no remorse. She turned and walked away. Danielle wrapped an arm around Noah, who had gone quiet. Are we in trouble? He asked softly. No, Marcus said. We're not the ones who should be worried. And yet, the damage had already begun. It wasn't just the accusation, it was the implication, the assumption. And now, as the plane soared calmly above the clouds, a deeper storm had begun to brew. One that no seatbelt could protect them from. The silence that followed Lexi's departure clung to the air like fog. It wasn't the quiet of peace, but the kind that carried questions. Unasked, unanswered, unsettling. Danielle didn't speak. She simply sat back, one hand resting protectively on Noah's knee, the other gripping the armrest with a quiet tension. Her jaw was clenched, eyes fixed forward but unfocused, trapped somewhere between disbelief and fury. Marcus, however, didn't look away. His gaze followed Lexi down the aisle, not out of vengeance, but with the firm stillness of a man who had seen this before, who had learned that silence wasn't always noble, and that dignity sometimes had to speak. Across the aisle, a passenger cleared his throat, an older man in a navy cardigan, seated 2 rows back. He shifted uncomfortably, the kind of movement that says, I saw, I know. Another woman, a few seats ahead, turned her head slightly, stealing a glance back toward them. She didn't say anything either, but her eyes lingered a beat longer than curiosity would allow. It was the beginning, the shift. Danielle leaned closer to Marcus, her voice tight, controlled. Are we supposed to just let that go? No, he answered quietly. We're supposed to remember it, all of it. Behind them, a whisper, then another. Passengers murmured, the kind of low-toned observations people make when trying to sound discreet, but aren't. Noah fidgeted with the edge of his hoodie. His earlier excitement had dulled into something smaller, withdrawn. The aircraft coasted at cruising altitude now, but the cabin wasn't calm. Something had shifted, a collective awareness that something unjust had been done, and yet no one quite knew how to name it aloud. Until Lexi returned, she didn't speak to Marcus or Danielle this time. Instead, she walked past them to speak to a colleague near the galley. Her posture was stiff, her tone hushed but tight with frustration. Danielle couldn't hear the words, but she could read the stance. Lexi was defending herself. Marcus folded his hands in his lap. She's spinning it. Danielle looked at him. You think she'll admit she was wrong? He turned his head slowly to meet her eyes. She didn't come here for the truth. She came here for a suspect. Danielle closed her eyes briefly. She thought of all the ways they had prepared for this trip, checking details twice, choosing an early morning flight to avoid the rush, dressing neatly and sitting quietly, as if dignity were a uniform you could wear to earn safety. And still, it hadn't been enough. Suddenly, Lexi turned back toward the cabin. Her face was composed. Her voice lifted just enough to carry a few rows forward and back. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, we're still looking for a missing item, a black leather wallet that was last seen during boarding. If anyone happens to pick it up by mistake or sees something out of place, please notify a crew member immediately. Her tone was flat, official, but the implication hung in the air like static. Everyone had seen where she went. Everyone knew who she'd questioned. Marcus looked straight ahead, his voice quiet but unmistakable. She's trying to frame the rest of the cabin, to cover herself. And he wasn't wrong. The announcement reframed the situation. Now it wasn't about a wrongful accusation. It was about a missing wallet and a cabin full of potential culprits. Lexi was rewriting the narrative, but it wasn't working. An older woman near the window shook her head. Another man leaned across the aisle toward Marcus. "I saw everything," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "You didn't do anything wrong." Danielle turned. "Thank you." "She never even asked the other passengers," he added, his brows creased with concern. "She went straight to you." And in that sentence, truth pierced through policy. Noah tugged gently on Danielle's sleeve. "Mommy, did I do something bad?" Danielle's heart cracked in a way only mothers understand. She took both his hands in hers and shook her head slowly. "No, sweetheart, you didn't do anything wrong. Someone else did." He blinked, unsure what that meant, but her certainty helped. Marcus adjusted in his seat, shifting his weight as if steadying himself. "She's not getting to apology." "No," Danielle replied, "but that doesn't mean we won't be heard." As if on cue, the curtain separating first class from the galley parted again. But this time it wasn't Lexi who emerged. It was Chloe Adams, the other attendant. Her expression was neutral. Her steps are cautious. She stopped beside Marcus and Danielle, crouching just slightly so she could speak quietly, at eye level. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said gently. "I just wanted you to know I didn't support how that was handled." Danielle blinked, surprised. "I saw the report being filed," Chloe continued, "but there was no confirmation, no witness. And she glanced toward the galley, then back. "I think you deserve to know that." Marcus nodded. "Thank you for your honesty." "I'm not in charge," she added, straightening, "but I'll make sure what I saw gets written down, word for word." It was a small thing, but in moments like this, small things are seismic. Danielle touched her necklace, a small silver charm she wore during every trip. Her mother had given it to her the day she graduated from college. "Stay grounded, even when you're flying," she'd said. Now that mantra felt prophetic. The plane flew on, but inside the cabin, the walls had shifted, no longer just between rows and service carts, but between truth and falsehood, between silence and courage. And as Lexi returned to the front of the plane, oblivious to the ripple she had begun, she had no idea. The cabin wasn't on her side anymore. The quiet was no longer benign. It had morphed into something colder, tighter. An invisible rope pulled taut across the length of the cabin. Every whispered comment, every glance passed between passengers carried weight now, as if the very air had turned into judgment, not just of what had happened, but of what hadn't. Lexi Morgan moved stiffly up the aisle, face unreadable, posture even more exact than before. Like precision could substitute for control. She stopped just shy of the galley, paused, and disappeared behind the curtain. Danielle exhaled through her nose. She hadn't realized she'd been holding her breath. "She's going to try to bury this," she murmured. Marcus didn't answer, not because he disagreed, but because he was listening. There were voices behind that curtain, low at first, but rising, one male. one female. The exchange was brief, clipped, then silence. A moment later, the curtains swished open, and Captain Harold Green stepped into the cabin. He wasn't tall, but he stood as if the entire weight of the plane rested on his shoulders, and somehow that didn't seem like a burden. He walked with calm efficiency, his navy jacket crisp, his captain's bars gleaming against his shoulders, and his expression unreadable beneath a carefully neutral brow. The murmurs around the cabin died instantly. He stopped at Marcus and Danielle's row, lowering his voice with quiet authority. "Mr. and Mrs. Bennett." Marcus turned, his face composed. "Yes, Captain." "I'd like to speak with you privately, if that's all right." Danielle's hand gripped the edge of her seat, then relaxed. "Of course, Yitrio." Captain Green motioned toward the front bulkhead, just beyond the curtain separating the cockpit and crew galley from the rest of the plane. As Marcus and Danielle stood, Noah reached out instinctively, his small fingers curling around Marcus's wrist. "I'll be right back, champ," Marcus whispered, crouching down. "You've been so brave." Noah nodded solemnly, his bear tucked tightly under one arm. The moment the Bennetts stepped past the curtain, the temperature in the front galley seemed to shift. Lexi stood near the wall, arms crossed, eyes flicking from the captain to the Bennetts. Chloe lingered a few feet away, unsure whether she should stay or retreat. "Miss Morgan," the captain said, turning to Lexi, "explain to me what happened." Lexi straightened. "A report was made about a missing wallet. I noticed a bag under Mr. Bennett's seat and—" "You went straight to this family," the captain interrupted, his tone still level, "without asking anyone else, without verification." "There was no time," Lexi said quickly. "It seemed suspicious. He was—" Captain Green's voice dropped, sharp as a scalpel. "Because he placed a child's backpack under a seat? That's suspicious now?" Lexi flinched. Marcus and Danielle said nothing. They didn't need to. Captain Green turned fully toward them. "Mr. Bennett, I've reviewed the sequence of events, and I want to be very clear. There is no formal accusation against you or your family. I'm deeply sorry that you were singled out." Danielle blinked, caught between relief and restrained rage. "You understand that this wasn't just an inconvenience, right?" she said quietly. "It was public. It was humiliating. And it was rooted in an assumption." The captain nodded slowly. "Yes, and I intend to escalate this the moment we land." Lexi opened her mouth, but the captain held up a hand without looking at her. "Not another word." Marcus, voice steady, finally spoke. "You have a flight to finish, but this doesn't end when we land." "I know," the captain said simply. There was a long, breathless silence. Chloe finally broke it with a gentle voice. "I'll stay with the family the rest of the flight," she offered. "Anything they need." Captain Green nodded. "Thank you." Then he turned to Lexi. "You are relieved of your duties for the remainder of this flight. Chloe will assume your responsibilities." Lexi's face drained of color. "You can't do that. I've been senior staff for—" "I've already cleared it with ground control," the captain said firmly. "You'll disembark before the passengers, and you will report directly to airline operations at Gate 7. This is not negotiable." Lexi stared at him, her face a strange mix of fury and disbelief. "So I'm being punished for trying to protect the flight?" "No," Captain Green said quietly. "You're being held accountable for endangering it." The finality in his tone silenced even Lexi. He turned to Marcus and Danielle once more. Please return to your seats. We'll speak again after landing." They nodded and moved quietly back into the cabin. As they stepped into the aisle, the cabin shifted again. People looked up, not with suspicion this time, but with recognition and respect. Some nodded gently. One woman placed her hand over her heart. Another passenger whispered, "We saw. We're sorry." Danielle sat down first, reaching for Noah's hand. Marcus followed, exhaling deeply as he settled beside them. "What happened?" Noah asked, blinking up at his parents. Danielle looked into her son's eyes. "The truth," she said gently. The truth started to speak. And outside, beyond the clouds, the sun rose a little higher, but inside, the plane had already begun its descent, not toward the runway, but toward justice. By the time Flight 331 began its final descent, the cabin was still. Not the peaceful kind of stillness that comes with a red-eye flight or a late-night landing. No, this was a stillness born of observation, of reflection, of dozens of strangers quietly absorbing a truth they could no longer unsee. Danielle ran her fingers gently through Noah's curls as he slept in her lap, his bear clutched tight beneath his chin. She had whispered stories to him until he drifted off, her voice calm though her spirit still trembled with what had just unfolded. Marcus, seated beside them, stared out the small window at the curve of the horizon. The clouds rolled beneath the plane like soft blankets, but his mind was anything but comforted. He had already opened the Notes app on his phone, tapping out details, exact phrases, chronological steps. He was building a record, not of revenge, but of accountability. Across the aisle, passengers glanced toward them, now not with suspicion, but solidarity. A man in a tailored suit offered a subtle nod. A mother a few rows back gave Danielle a tight-lipped smile, her eyes misted with the kind of understanding that crossed culture and language. And yet, even in that silent alliance, Danielle knew it was not enough. A quiet nod wouldn't rewrite what had been said to them. Sympathy didn't change what Noah had seen. Lexi had disappeared into the front of the plane after being relieved of her duties. She hadn't returned once, and no one missed her. It was Chloe who had brought Danielle a fresh bottle of water and placed a soft blanket over Noah's knees. Chloe, who had knelt by their row, not to apologize on behalf of the airline, but as a person with clear eyes and a trembling voice. "I'm so sorry this happened," she'd whispered. "I'll make sure my part of the report reflects the truth." Danielle had nodded gently. "Thank you." But inside, she was already preparing for the next conversation. The real one, the one that would happen once they were back on the ground. As the wheels touched down with a muted jolt, the quiet hum of reverse thrust filled the cabin. But it was Chloe's voice that came next, not Lexi's. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Boston. Please remain seated as we taxi to the gate." Passengers shifted, buckles clicked open, luggage straps were adjusted, but no one stood until the plane came to a full stop. Then something unexpected happened. One by one, as passengers began to stand and reach for their belongings, several paused briefly near row 2, where the Bennetts sat. A woman in her 60s leaned down slightly, her voice hushed. "That was wrong. I'm sorry you had to go through it." A college-aged man with a backpack added, "You kept your cool. I don't know if I could have." Marcus thanked them quietly. Danielle smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. Then came Chloe again. "I just spoke with the captain," she said gently. "Two representatives from airline management are waiting at the gate. They'd like to speak with you privately before you leave the terminal." Marcus nodded. "We expected that." They're aware of the situation, Chloe added, and I believe they know it's serious. Danielle only replied with a soft, good. At the gate, beyond the thick bridge of the jetway, two people in formal uniforms and stiff smiles stood with tablet folders in hand. Their expressions weren't cold, just cautious, carefully rehearsed. One stepped forward. "Mr. and Mrs. Bennett?" she asked, extending a hand. "I'm Avery Kim, Client Experience Lead. Thank you for agreeing to speak with us." "We didn't agree yet," Marcus replied, not unkindly. "We're simply listening." "Understood," she said, voice measured. "Would you mind following us to a private meeting room?" Danielle glanced toward the luggage carousel. "And our bags? They'll be taken care of." Marcus nodded once, taking Noah, half asleep, in his arms, and following them down a sterile hallway with gray carpeting and fluorescent lights that hummed too loudly. The room they were led to had no windows, just a round table, 4 chairs, and a carafe of room temperature water. As they sat, Avery folded her hands. "Before anything else, let me extend the most sincere apology on behalf of the airline. What occurred on Flight 331 does not reflect our standards or values." Marcus waited a beat. "Then explain to me," he said, "why it keeps happening." Avery hesitated. "I understand that this wasn't an isolated experience for you." "No," Danielle cut in gently, "but this time our son was watching." Avery glanced toward Noah, who had now crawled into Danielle's lap, his eyes open just enough to track the voices in the room. The second representative, a man named Harold from the airline's internal accountability unit, cleared his throat. "We're conducting a full internal review," he began. "Lexi Morgan has been suspended pending a formal investigation. The flight captain has already submitted his report. Chloe Adams corroborated your version of events." Marcus said nothing. Danielle leaned forward. "Suspension is a start, but we're not here for one person's punishment. We want to know what you plan to change." Harold blinked. "Excuse me?" Danielle's voice remained calm. "We don't want a gift card or an upgrade. We want a public acknowledgement, a commitment to retraining your staff, to address systemic bias that leads to assumptions like the one Lexi made. And," Marcus added, "we want that in writing." The room stilled. Avery's eyes narrowed slightly, not with hostility, but calculation. This wasn't going to be a simple PR cleanup. The Bennetts weren't going to be swayed by soft words or conciliatory gestures. They weren't trying to make a scene. They were trying to make a point. "We'll escalate this to senior leadership," Avery said slowly, "and we'll be in touch within the next 48 hours. "You'll hear from us first," Marcus replied. "We've already documented everything, and our lawyers are standing by." There was nothing theatrical about the statement, just the truth, the kind that people listened to and remembered. Outside in the main terminal, passengers were already posting stories, comments, video clips. The footage had been discreet, but clear. Lexi's accusation, Marcus's calm defense, Chloe's intervention, the captain's response. It had started as whispers, then became a rumble, and no, already within the it was becoming a headline. By nightfall, Flight 331 was no longer just a flight. It was a flashpoint. What had begun as a whisper in the cabin had, by the time Marcus and Danielle returned to their hotel, ignited into a blaze that no corporate firewall could contain. The first video clip surfaced just after 4 o'clock p.m. grainy, vertical, captured by a passenger seated across the aisle. It showed Lexi standing over the Bennetts, her arms crossed, her voice clipped, as she demanded to search a child's backpack. Marcus's quiet, deliberate resistance. Danielle's hand steady on Noah's back. The clip ended just before the captain arrived, but it was enough. The caption read, "Flight attendant accuses black family of theft. Demands child's bag be searched. Watch the father's calm response. Our flight racial bias." Within hours, the post was everywhere. Shared, reposted, echoed, and so were the comments. The calm in that father's voice? Chilling, dignified, and infuriating. Imagine being 6 years old and having to learn this lesson in first class. She didn't even ask anyone else. She went straight to them. This is why people don't move on, because it keeps happening. By the time Marcus checked his phone again, the video had 1.8 million views. Danielle's inbox was full. Messages from reporters, lawyers, and advocacy organizations, supporters, strangers. And in one corner of the city, in a dim apartment with shades drawn tight against the noise of the world, Lexi Morgan was unraveling. She hadn't gone home immediately. After disembarking under the silent escort of ground staff, Lexi had been told, calmly but firmly, that she was suspended. With pay, they emphasized, as if that softened anything. Her badge had been collected, her access revoked. Now she sat hunched over her kitchen counter, the soft blue glow of her laptop lighting up her pale face. The video played again and again. She barely recognized herself in it, not just because of the angle or the tone, but because of the response, the judgments in the comments, the rage, the precision with which strangers dissected her posture, her language, and her tone of voice. She's not even pretending to look anywhere else. This is what bias in uniform looks like. They always say it a protocol after the damage is done. Lexi pressed her palms against her temples. Her phone buzzed constantly. Group chats from coworkers she hadn't heard from in months. Some checking in, others are staying quiet. Too quiet. An email pinged. Subject: notice of formal review, urgent. She didn't open it. Instead, she stared at the wall. The silence in the apartment was unbearable. Her carefully ordered life, her seniority, her spotless record, her crisp authority was crumbling. And for the first time, she was beginning to realize this wasn't going to pass. Not this time. At the hotel, Marcus sat at the edge of the bed, scrolling through headlines. Family humiliated mid-flight after false accusation. Airline silent. Child accused in first class sparks outrage. Flight 331. The story everyone's watching. He turned the screen to Danielle Bennett. She didn't speak for a long moment. Then, "It's happening." Marcus nodded. "But not because of us. Because people watched." Danielle glanced at Noah, who had finally drifted off to sleep again, this time curled between two pillows and still clutching Leo, his stuffed bear. "He won't remember all the details," she said, "but he'll remember how we responded." Marcus's eyes softened, and how many people stood with him. Meanwhile, inside the downtown headquarters of North Star Airlines, the air was anything but still. A crisis team had been activated. A boardroom filled with department heads and legal staff buzzed with urgency. Public relations was already drafting a statement. The HR department was requesting full transcripts. The CEO had been looped in on a private call with the legal team, and on the wall, a projected screen displayed the trending hashtags. Flight 331, Justice for Noah, do better. North Star, bias, in the skies. They were rising fast. Damage control is no longer sufficient, the PR director snapped. We need a response. And not just to them, another executive added. This is a broader cultural wound. The public wants a shift, not just an apology. Silence fell. Everyone in that room knew. They weren't dealing with a simple incident anymore. They were facing a reckoning. Back at the hotel, Danielle opened a blank email draft. The cursor blinked. After a moment, she typed the subject. Reflight 331, formal response required. She began to write, not with anger, but with clarity, a list of expectations, a request for a meeting, and a declaration. This story would not be erased in a carefully worded press release. They weren't asking to be centered in a viral moment. They were asking to be respected publicly, structurally, and permanently. The next morning, the airline released a statement. North Star Airlines deeply regrets the distress caused to the Bennett family on Flight 331. We are reviewing all internal procedures and have placed the involved crew member on leave pending a full investigation. This does not reflect who we are. But the statement wasn't enough. The public saw it for what it was. Vague, evasive, too late. And Marcus, he posted his own. A calm 2-minute video. No theatrics, just the truth. He sat beside Danielle, who rested a gentle hand on Noah's shoulder as he played beside her. The camera was steady. Marcus's voice was firm, grounded. We weren't just humiliated on a plane. We were targeted, without cause, and our child was made to feel like a suspect for simply existing. Danielle continued, this happens more than most people know. It's quiet, it's subtle, but it's real. And we're not going to let this moment pass without demanding change. Not just for us, but for every family who's ever been looked at and judged before the word was spoken. The video ended with a single line spoken by Marcus. The sky belongs to all of us, and we're not stepping aside. It was viewed 10 million times in 24 hours. The room was too bright. Lexi Morgan sat at the end of a long conference table, her posture stiff but her fingers nervously intertwined. The sterile white walls of North Star Airlines Human Resources Conference Center gave no comfort, no cover, just a flat, clean space, nothing to absorb the weight of what was coming. Across from her sat 3 people, members of the airline's internal review committee. Their expressions were unreadable, their folders open, their pens poised. Ms. Morgan, began the woman at the center, this hearing is part of the formal review process under Article 4 of the Employee Conduct Policy. You've been placed on administrative leave pending our investigation into your actions on Flight 331. Lexi swallowed hard. I understand. A moment of silence followed. Then the man on the left looked down at his notes. We've reviewed passenger statements, your report, crew testimonies, and video footage that has now gone viral. He didn't need to say how viral. Lexi had seen the numbers, had read the comments, had watched herself over and over again, making assumptions that now echoed across the country. We're here to determine not just whether you followed protocol, the woman continued, but whether your conduct reflected the values of this airline. Lexi's eyes lifted slowly. I made a mistake. Did you? Asked the third committee member, raising an eyebrow. Or did you act on a judgment that felt natural because it's one you've made before? Lexi felt the question like a blow. I thought I was protecting the flight, she said, her voice thin. Protecting it from what? The woman pressed. A father placing his child's backpack beneath a seat? Lexi's voice broke, barely above a whisper. I thought I saw something. You didn't see anything, the man replied quietly. You assumed. For the first time since the hearing began, Lexi said nothing. Not because she disagreed, but because she couldn't deny it. Across town in a quiet cafe near the Boston Commons, Marcus and Danielle sat across from North Star's executive vice president of public strategy, Julian Grant. He was in his early 50s, sharply dressed, but with a weariness in his posture that no tailored suit could mask. Thank you for agreeing to meet, Julian said, folding his hands. We agreed to listen, Danielle corrected gently. Julian nodded. Fair. He slid a folder across the table. Inside, you'll find an outline of our formal plan to address the systemic failure Flight 331 exposed. Marcus opened the folder but didn't look at it. Julian continued carefully. We've launched an internal audit of bias training protocols. We've suspended the flight attendant in question. And we're preparing to release a full public apology endorsed by the CEO, naming the incident directly. No evasions. Danielle raised an eyebrow. And? Julian hesitated. And we'd like to invite you to co-chair a new advisory panel focused on racial equity in passenger experience. You'd help shape the reform. Monitor implementation. You'd have a platform, not just as victims, but as partners in change. There it was, not just a gesture, a power shift. Marcus closed the folder. We're not looking to join a PR campaign. Julian leaned forward. I wouldn't insult you by offering one. But the truth is our company cannot recover credibility without doing something real, and real means transparency. Real means bringing the people we wronged into the room. Danielle's eyes didn't move from his. She believed him, at least partially, but belief wasn't enough. We'll consider it, she said. Julian nodded. I hope you do, because people are watching. Not just what we say, but who we listen to. Back at airline headquarters, Lexi stood outside the review room. The door had just closed behind her. Her mind spun with the committee's words. Their silence. The weight of what might come next. She wasn't fired, not yet, but she was close. In her inbox, an unread message awaited. It was from someone she didn't expect. Danielle Bennett. The subject line was brief. Understanding is earned. Lexi opened it. This isn't just about a job, Ms. Morgan. It's about harm. And who carries it? You may never undo what happened, but you can choose what you do next. We'll be watching. Lexi stared at the screen for a long time. Her pride wanted to be angry, but some deeper part of her, the part that had stayed silent too long, felt something different. Not shame, but awakening. That night, Marcus posted another video. This time it wasn't about the flight, it was about what came after. He spoke not as a man wronged, but as a father, a husband, a citizen. Airlines talk about turbulence in the air, but the truth is we've been flying through cultural turbulence for years. You don't fight that with silence, you fight it with change. Danielle joined him at the end. We aren't angry anymore, she said softly. We're ready. It was no longer just about a flight, By week's end, Flight 331 had become a symbol, and symbols demand action. The morning news ran segments under banners like "Airline Under Fire After Racial Profiling Mid-Flight." "Families Call for Change Gains National Support." Flight 331, a reckoning at 30,000 feet. Talk shows debated it, editorials dissected it. Advocacy groups flooded North Star's inbox with demands for public accountability. And then came the unexpected announcement: a public town hall, live-streamed, open press, hosted by North Star's CEO and moderated by a national journalist. On the stage, 2 empty seats would be reserved for Marcus and Danielle Bennett. When the email arrived, Marcus read it twice, then passed the phone to Danielle. She blinked. "They're doing it." "No," Marcus met her eyes. "They're inviting us to do it with them." Danielle sat back, processing. "Do we go?" Marcus didn't answer right away. He looked out the hotel window where the skyline met a wide canvas of gray sky. "If we go," he said at last, "we go to speak the truth, not to play nice." Danielle nodded once. "Then we go." At the same time, Lexi stood outside the HR building staring at her phone. The notification was short. "You are invited to attend North Star's Public Accountability Forum." Not as staff, not as spokesperson, but as the one who had started the storm. A follow-up message followed, this time from her direct supervisor. "You may choose to attend or not, but know this: people are watching. What you say matters. What you don't say may matter more." Lexi swallowed hard. For days she had hidden behind closed blinds, behind carefully worded drafts of apologies that never felt sincere enough or brave enough. She had considered quitting, vanishing, moving on. But moving on without growth was just moving away. And deep inside, something told her that maybe, just maybe, standing in front of that room, facing the people she hurt, might be the only honest thing she had left to do. 2 days later, the town hall began. The auditorium was full: reporters, staff, executives, guests, activists. The air buzzed with anticipation and thinly disguised skepticism. The moderator stood at center stage, cool and commanding. On one side, the CEO of North Star, flanked by legal counsel and PR directors. On the other hand, Marcus and Danielle Bennett, dressed not for war, but for dignity. Danielle wore navy, soft and sharp. Marcus, a charcoal blazer with an open collar. Between them sat Noah, legs swinging slightly under his chair, a quiet witness to the moment that would define their story. The moderator welcomed the room, then addressed the elephant no one could ignore. "We're here today because a line was crossed, a family was harmed, a child was humiliated, and we are now in the space between apology and transformation." The audience hushed. Marcus leaned forward, speaking with quiet precision. "You all saw the video. You know what was said. What you didn't see was what came after. When we had to explain to our son why someone thought his backpack might hold a stolen wallet, not his crayons and his snacks." Danielle followed. Her voice didn't shake. "It wasn't just about Lexi Morgan. It was about a culture that made her feel justified, that trained her to act on fear, not facts." The CEO spoke next. His apology was direct this time. No deflections, no euphemisms. "This happened on our watch," he said, "and we failed." But words, Marcus knew, were only the start. "What are you going to do?" he asked simply. "Not just for us, but for the next family that walks onto your warplane with brown skin and dignity in their stride. The room held its breath, and then, from the back row, a single figure stood. Lexi. Her voice was small at first, but clear. "I am not here to defend myself," she said, "because I was wrong. I didn't see a man placing a bag under a seat. I saw a threat where there was none. That wasn't protocol. That was biased, my bias." All eyes turned to her. She stepped forward slowly, her hands open, trembling slightly. "I've spent the past week trying to write the perfect apology, but today I understand something else. I didn't need perfect words. I needed humility and accountability." She looked directly at Danielle. "I'm sorry for what I did to your family. And I'm willing to stand with you now. Not because it clears my name, but because it's time I did the right thing for someone else." A long silence followed, and then applause. Quiet at first, but growing. Not in celebration, but in recognition. Recognition of a truth named aloud. That evening, Marcus and Danielle sat with Noah in their hotel room. He was drawing a simple sketch of an airplane with three static figures holding hands near the wing. "Is that us?" Danielle asked. Noah nodded. "Yeah, that's the plane where we made it better." Marcus and Danielle exchanged a look. Maybe it wasn't over yet, but something had begun. And for the first time since Flight 331, they felt something stronger than anger. They felt hope. The town hall had ended, but the echoes hadn't. The next morning, a photo of Marcus, Danielle, and Noah standing on stage, back straight, hands clasped, graced the front pages of half a dozen national newspapers. From silence to reform, Flight 331 family sparks industry reckoning. "We're not going away." Bennett's call for nationwide airline bias review. More than just a story now, they were a movement. Not because they wanted to be, because the moment demanded it. At North Star's headquarters, change was no longer theoretical. An emergency board meeting was convened 24 hours after the town hall. It wasn't just about Lexi anymore. It was about the systems that made her actions seem reasonable. About training protocols, reporting hierarchies, the gaping absence of lived experience in corporate policy rooms. Julian Grant, the EVP of Public Strategy, stood at the head of the conference room with a digital slide behind him. Project Clear, culture, listening, equity, accountability, reform. "This will be painful," he said simply, "because real reform always is." The plan included third-party audits, bias de-escalation training for all staff, from gate agents to executives, a new independent review board, co-chaired by the Bennetts, with the power to investigate claims of discrimination, and most importantly, a formal partnership with civil rights organizations and advocacy groups to design airline-wide policy changes, not just optics, architecture, and the first flight to operate under the new guidelines would bear the name Flight 331 Restored. Lexi Morgan, meanwhile, sat in a modest community center 5 blocks from the North Star campus. It wasn't mandated. No one had ordered her to go. But she had walked in quietly that morning and registered herself for the airline's first voluntary restorative dialogue training, now open to all employees, current and suspended. The instructor, a former DEI director turned trauma-informed educator, didn't recognize her until lunch. "You're the one," the woman said gently. Lexi nodded. I'm the one who failed, she replied. The instructor tilted her head. Or the one who finally showed up. The sessions were intense, uncomfortable. Lexi was asked to sit with the ways implicit bias lived inside her. Not as evil, but as unexamined survival habits. She had to name what she feared, what she had assumed, what she had ignored. By the end of the third day, she had written a letter, not for the airline, not for the cameras, for Noah. You were brave in a way I wasn't. You held your bear while I held a bias. And I hope you grow up knowing that what happened wasn't your fault. It was mine. And I am so, so sorry. She didn't know if she would send it, but she folded it carefully and placed it in her bag anyway. Back at the Bennett's home, a different kind of work had begun. Danielle was now fielding emails daily from flight attendants, airport staff, even federal regulators asking for insight, guidance, help. A soft-spoken woman who once lived only for the privacy of her family was now drafting frameworks for federal hearings on transportation equity. And Marcus? He'd been asked to testify before the Aviation Oversight Committee the following month. When the invitation came, he laughed under his breath and turned to Danielle. Think this is what our honeymoon prepared us for? She smiled, curling up next to him on the couch. Only if the Senate has worse food than that motel in Cleveland. Noah, in the background, was reading aloud from a picture book. Daddy? He asked. Yeah, bud. Do people still think we took the wallet? Marcus froze, his throat tightening. Danielle reached over, touching his hand. No, sweetheart, she answered softly. They know the truth now. Noah nodded and turned a page. 2 weeks later, a new video was released by North Star. Not a commercial, a confession. Lexi sat in a small studio, unscripted, unstyled. No makeup, no edits, just her, speaking plainly. I'm not a villain, but I was wrong, she said. On Flight 331, I made assumptions that caused pain. I didn't ask questions. I didn't pause, and I forgot that my uniform didn't give me the right to treat a family like a threat. She looked directly into the camera. To Noah, I see you now, and I hope one day, when you're older, you'll see that I tried to do something better afterward. Not to erase the harm, but to never cause it again. The video was met with a mixed response. Some praised the vulnerability, others remained skeptical, and that was okay. Because of accountability, Lexi now understood that was not a destination, it was a practice. At a press conference held outside Washington, D.C., Danielle stood before a row of microphones. Behind her, a banner read, "The Flight Forward, Reimagining Justice in the Skies." This movement, she said, isn't about punishment. It's about responsibility. It's about what happens when institutions start listening to the people they once dismissed. She glanced to her left. Marcus, Julian Grant, a representative from the Department of Transportation, and sitting in the second row, in quiet solidarity, Lexi. She didn't speak. She didn't pose. She just listened. Which, Danielle thought, was a start. It was a crisp spring morning at Logan International Airport, and Gate 17 looked different, not just because of the navy and gold banners, or the families dressed in their Sunday best, or the reporters tucked into quiet corners with cameras poised. It was something in the air, a stillness before ceremony, a sense that something mattered here. At the end of the jet bridge, a small plaque had been unveiled just minutes earlier. Flight 331, reimagined. in honor of every passenger who demanded dignity and every voice that refused to stay silent. Marcus Bennett stood beside it, quietly adjusting the cuff of his blazer. Danielle, dressed in ivory and pale gold, held Noah's hand. Noah, now almost 7, had grown since that day, but in his other hand, he still carried Leo the bear, a quiet tether to a memory that was finally beginning to soften. The ceremony began on the tarmac with a short address by Julian Grant, now promoted to Chief Integrity Officer for North Star Airlines. His voice carried across the apron, steady and solemn. Flight 331 will always mark a point of pain in our history, but today it also marks the beginning of a promise. Behind him stood key figures from aviation, civil rights, and Congress, all gathered to witness what was no longer just a PR event, but a turning point. Then came Marcus. He didn't read from notes. He didn't need to. I was taught growing up that sometimes to fly, you have to let go of the weight you carry. But what they don't tell you is, sometimes that weight isn't yours. Sometimes it's projected onto you, assumed, forced. He paused, eyes on Noah. This flight today isn't just symbolic. It's a commitment that children like my son will board a plane and never wonder if their presence is mistaken for a problem. Applause rose, quiet but powerful. Then Danielle stepped forward. Noah has a surprise, she said, smiling. The microphone was lowered, and for a moment everyone waited. Noah stepped up, Leo tucked under one arm. A folded paper was in his hand. He looked out over the crowd, then read, "I hope people are nice now. I hope when I fly, they don't think I'm bad. I hope people know I just want snacks and cartoons, and to go places just like them." The silence afterward was thick with emotion. Even the reporters paused, some lowering their cameras just long enough to feel. The inaugural flight 331R boarded at noon. Every crew member had completed the new Clear certification. Every passenger had been randomly selected, spanning ages, races, genders, and walks of life, a celebration of inclusion by design. The pilot made a short announcement as the doors closed. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Flight 331R, a new beginning. Today, we fly not just to our destination, but towards something better." Noah was invited to the cockpit for takeoff. When he returned to his seat, he whispered to his mom, "I want to be a pilot someday." Danielle smiled. "You already are, in your way." Meanwhile, across the country, legislation called the Passenger Equity Act was introduced in the Senate, a direct result of the national movement sparked by a Flight 331. It would mandate anti-bias training across all major airlines, require anonymous incident reporting systems, and establish a federal task force on discrimination in public transportation. Behind the bill, Marcus and Danielle Bennett. As for Lexi Morgan, she was not on the flight. She didn't want to be. But that morning, she stood just outside the North Star Training Center, holding a folder of papers she had helped draft. They were part of a new module on repair-based conflict response, something she had written in collaboration with the same advocacy group that once campaigned for her dismissal. One of the trainers approached. "You ready?" Lexi nodded. "Almost." She looked toward the sky as a plane passed overhead, silver belly glinting in the sunlight. She would never undo what she'd done, but she could help prevent it from happening again. That night, Flight 331R touched down for a gentle landing. No drama, no spectacle, just a safe, quiet arrival, the kind of flight people forget. And for the Bennetts, that was exactly the point. As they stepped off the plane, an older passenger behind them touched Danielle's arm. "I saw your son's speech," she whispered. I cried, not just because of what happened, but because he reminded me that kindness can be taught. Danielle nodded, and courage can be passed down. Later, in their living room at home, Marcus tucked Noah into bed. Noah yawned, pulling Leo close. "Did I do okay?" Marcus leaned down, kissed his forehead. "You did more than okay. You helped change the sky." Danielle stood at the doorway, watching them. The sun had gone down, but the light lingered, not from outside, but from within. Moral of the story: prejudice often travels in silence, through unchecked habits, subtle glances, and unspoken assumptions. But justice speaks, sometimes loudly, sometimes quietly, but always with a purpose. What happened on Flight 331 was not just an incident, it was a lens revealing the cracks beneath the surface. This story is about what happens when those affected choose dignity over rage, and those responsible choose accountability over denial. We all board the same plane. We all share the same sky. And when we choose to listen, to learn, and to rise, we create space not just for change, but for healing. So next time you look up, remember, justice doesn't fly on autopilot. It requires all of us in the cockpit.